All right, everybody, let's get started. Thank you for coming to our Client Insight webinar, The Analytics Behind Better Health and Human Services Outcomes. We're very excited to have you with us. I'm Bryce. I'm from Acovia's marketing team, and I'll be our host for the afternoon. But before we get started, here's the plan for the webinar. We'll start with an introduction for our presenters and Acovia and what we're about. And then we'll go into a discussion about some of the challenges and opportunities of working with data. From there, we'll introduce Client Insight, offer a demo of some of its capabilities, and then discuss some of the key benefits as well as our roadmap. And then at the end, we'll turn time over to you for Q&A. Now, we want to hear from you about your experiences dealing with technology in case and care management. We want you to let us know about how technology has limited or maybe even created issues for your organization. For instance, some questions might be what hasn't been working for you? What would your ideal solution look like? So we would ask you to take a moment to consider that and drop your thoughts in the chat. Additionally, this webinar's chat will give you the option to submit questions. So feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A function. Anything that you'd like to see out of Client Insight or any questions, concerns, or comments. At the end of this time together, we will take some time to address your questions. And of course, we are recording today. Now, so everybody, please be on your best behavior, of course. I'm sure that won't be a problem in our field. Now, today presenting for us, I'd like to introduce David Lewis and Stacy Berta. David serves as our Vice President of Strategy, as well as the Vice Chairman of the Board for National Human Services Data Consortium, or NHSDC. Many of you will be familiar with this organization. David has over 14 years of experience in housing and economic development and has served in a variety of important roles in this field, including the HMIS administrator for the city of Spokane, Washington. Stacy, so yeah, David, go ahead and wave to the camera and say hi to the people.
Hello.
Thank you. Now, presenting with David is Stacy Berta. She is a senior solutions engineer here at Acovia. Her experience with Client Track stretches back to her work with nonprofit human services organizations, where she used the platform as an end user and as a system administrator. She joined Acovia in 2012, and since then, she's been a client success manager, solution engineer, business analyst, implementation engineer, and more. So she's worn many hats and has seen the entire spectrum of what we do here at Acovia. So that's enough about us. But before we jump in, we want to let some of you know who we are as a company. Some of you may not have heard of Acovia before, or you may be only loosely familiar. Acovia is a privately held software as a service or SaaS company based in Salt Lake City, with a focus on providing software solutions in the field of health and human services. We've gone by a few names in the past, before as Client Track, then Acovia Solutions, and now we are Acovia. We have over 20 years experience servicing the needs of health and human services organizations, including HMIS, victim service providers, refugee resettlement agencies, and many more. We're currently serving over 1,200 organizations across the United States, ranging from nonprofits to governments and for-profit agencies. So if this is your first time meeting us, we are glad to meet you, and we're just as glad to welcome all the familiar faces. All right, that's enough about Acovia for now. With that, we'll turn our time over to our speakers. So,
All right.
David, take it away.
Thank you, Bryce. All right, and really excited that everybody is taking time on their Friday to join us today. And I want to start this conversation off with really facing, I think, for many of us, the real challenge that, especially in today's world, we're contending with. We are awash in data, data everywhere. I think, it's in the title. I mean, it's the analytics that lead to outcomes, that drive outcomes. And we know that data can do this. Data is critical in in driving outcomes, in providing effective case management, in serving vulnerable populations. But making sense of that data, translating that data into information, and making that information actionable can be a real challenge. I certainly experienced my fair share of that as an HMIS administrator. And as the world we live in, and as case management grows ever more complex, we're going to be facing these challenges and growing challenges that we have to step up and meet. And we can do that through intentionally applied technology and allowing technology to serve as a force multiplier. So we're going to talk through some of our approaches in meeting that need. But first, just want to talk through some of these challenges. What are these challenges and how can these contribute to opportunities? I mean, certainly we've all experienced the increasing pressure to turn data into actionable strategies. That's very true within the COC space. There's been this need, more data, data for what? Certainly, we've had the pressure to turn reports in on time. We've considered data quality, and really it's been more of a focus on outputs. But it's been, the pressure is on to achieve more than just that. It's more than compliance. How do we get to outcomes? How do we use that data effectively? Data silos. I think for any of us operating within the HMIS space, we know what that's like. Frequently, our agencies that work within an HMIS are entering duplicate, triplicate, in some cases in communities I've worked in, 4 different databases entering the same data, or maybe even an unwillingness to participate in an HMIS as a result of this burden, this need to enter data into competing platforms. So that silos the data, giving us less data to work with. Partnerships. We certainly know that that a strong community is based around partnerships. However, different organizations have different data needs, and that can be very difficult to accommodate within a single platform. That inability can hinder developing those partnerships in ways that really drive outcomes. Now, I could talk about privacy and confidentiality, but I think you'd want to hear from Stacy on that, given her extensive experience in the domestic violence and victim service providers vertical and what that can look like. Stacy, do you have anything to add there?
I do. Thank you, David. From a victim services perspective, there's additional considerations in the privacy and confidentiality realm. As anyone familiar with that space knows, there's a different level of responsibility with the security and safety of victims in particular that isn't solely present in victim service provider, but certainly is a high priority and focus. And that often impacts those conversations and those partnerships, those data sharing agreement conversations. I think it's pretty common in that space to hit a few more brick walls and find people who are just not willing to start the conversation. And there's creativity that sometimes goes into that. Often recognizing and understanding those shared goals and visions, being upfront and transparent about the regulatory guidelines and how important they are, how important the safety of data, regardless of the populations you're serving are, and looking at the big picture in strategic ways to understand where that value in sharing data is and where you can really make true impact by combining and moving through those sharing agreements, whether it's looking at strategic, unique avenues of looking at aggregate data when you cannot or should not share more personal identifying
Mhm.
information, as well as looking at data sets and information pieces that are more public or more accessible to combine in a secure way with more secure data. And those are avenues that can really help you lead to conversations. What about you, David? I'd love to hear your experiences as
Well,
well.
I'm reflecting on just the difficulties of navigating, especially if you're trying to piece together that community data puzzle, and back to that relationships and partnerships and just the laws that govern the ability to share information, that the fact that technology needs to make that easier. So I'm thinking of medical providers, justice providers. I mean, they all play a role in allowing for effective case management and outcomes and really achieving lasting outcomes for those that we serve. So I appreciate your perspective on that, Stacy, and I think all of us on the call have experienced that in various ways. If you want to throw some of your experiences in the chat, I think that would be great. Would love to hear from you. I think, just moving beyond compliance is another something I come across frequently in communities. It's this desire, we want to be more, we want to do more with our data than just reporting. Certainly compliance, meeting funder requirements matters. We all need the funding that drives those services, but the data can be used far beyond just compliance. And technology needs to support that, and it needs to make it easier. So we're going to be showing you just a couple of the ways that we can do that in Client Insight and how Client Insight can complement Client Track. So really looking forward to sharing some of those examples with you today. To kind of tie out the challenges that so many of us have faced, rote task management. I know some of you out there, when you hear that, maybe you're thinking about the tedious process of managing by name lists or trying to determine, do you have quality data? What does that look like? Running endless reports, scanning Excel documents. In some cases, that could take up an entire FTE, an entire position devoted to that. And so when we think about growing caseloads and the ever more complex needs of those seeking services, we must address where capacity is lost through this rote task management. So to get into what does the right tool set look like to meet these challenges, I'm going to pass it over to Stacy to give us an overview of what goes into Client Insight and why does the right tool for the job matter?
Thank you, David. And the right tools for the job do matter. They're so impactful. And as you're considering those technical solutions, we've incorporated many of these thought processes in our selection of the stack and what you see on your screen with our architecture within Client Insight, which is that the performance, the innovation, the best in class component considerations really are a key driver of how usable in the short term and the long term that platform is going to be, driving to long term success. Some key factors as considered in the technical stack is the data sets, the data sources that you're working with, looking at vendor agnostic ingestion components that allow you to work and expand those data components into a single compiled data set. Also looking at leveraging a data lake, really including both that structured and those additional unstructured data points, really provide additional analytics and machine learning capabilities that really provide that additional component and layer to advance the solution. As we will move into data warehousing and optimizing that schema for performance and analytics, making sure privacy of that data is applicable by protecting that personal identifying information and ease of use for the different stakeholders or users across the community. It's really a key component to consider. And part of that data warehousing piece is really the data cleansing aspect. And I know, David, you can speak a lot to our deduplication and client matching piece within Client Insight that really helps that in the long run.
Yes, thanks, Stacy. And I got a little excited about that. So
You did.
trying to jump ahead there because it is cool. And one thing I want to point out and why this right tool matters and why we spent the time that we did, which is over 2 years in development, is making sure that what we offer as a data warehouse and its ability to drive insights and outcomes is truly able to manage any data source in any format. So just to give you a sense of what that means, you could bring in potentially census data or eviction lab data, different data sources that give you the structure that allows you to explore community needs leading to better outcomes. So we need to be able to, as part of a good data warehouse, we need to be able to support getting to quality data. And a part of that is effectively deduplicating and matching clients across disparate data sources. So the approach we're taking in Client Insight, and we do have a couple screenshots up here to give you a sense of what that might look like. So our strategy was to apply an open source machine learning model, Python-based machine learning model that has strong independent research asserting its accuracy in identifying duplication, and then making this accessible, which is another aspect of client insight, which is we're taking a powerful tech stack, but we're making it accessible. So it's not a steep learning curve, and it allows staff to be able to effectively use client insight without a great deal of additional training. And that is really true when it comes to our deduplication process. 5-step process. In the training aspect of a machine learning algorithm, where you're helping the system better refine and better identify duplicates, requires 10 positives. So 10, yes, these are a duplicate record pair, and 10, no. And then using that training, the system is able to manage effectively millions of rows of data if necessary, but able to apply that training in a way that truly allows you to identify duplicates across different data sources.
Yeah, and
Once
that's a
you've
great point on that performance, David, and the importance of that stack and being able to handle large amounts of data in that deduplication and matching process.
Yes,
I
thanks.
love
I mean,
that.
it's it can be about big data, but what I appreciate in the data warehousing strategy that we're offering is whether it's big data or small data, it's able to use that data effectively. So, and then that's key to a community, and the ability to scale solutions over time, because community needs change over time. So the technology needs to change as well. So once we've deduplicated across all those data sources, the next step is really establishing a bridge across all those data sources. What does this unique client index, the singular representation of this client, look like across all the data sources, all the interactions that that client has had? So once you've deduplicated, once you've established this unique client index, then you're able to really translate that ability into something meaningful, particularly when it comes to collaborative case management across organizations. And I'm going to hand it off to Stacy for us to really get into what does this look like in client insight? What does this really translate into as far as value?
Absolutely. That matching and that unique client index can enable care coordination and collaboration in new and meaningful ways where it may not have been possible previously, or provide that accessibility in a meaningful way. One of our tools that really prioritizes that particular use case where we're able to support individuals in our community efficiently using data at our disposal is Client 360. You'll notice as I've logged into Client Insight, I'm on an individual record for Marla. And this is incorporating data from multiple data sets, allowing me to have a holistic view. And the impact of Client Insight is really identifying those different stakeholders and users and those sharing agreements to what data we have access to view and work with to help promote key outcomes in that way. In this instance, I'm looking at two different data sources, but think about this in the myriad of data that's important to you. So this is one example, but not the end of the story. In this case, I'm looking at HMIS data and EHR data, and you'll notice on my top right portion, I can see the most recent project and encounter within the health record, allowing me to see the most recent interactions and key data points related to those data points. Marla's currently in permanent supportive housing, and we can see there's no exit, so she's actively engaged in permanent housing. I've selected based on the important elements as I work within this community from each of these data sets, identifying what components are critical at a glance and allowing me to add or remove other elements that I might want to include so that I have that quick visibility to help support the outcomes for Marla as I work with her. The same holds true of my card for my EHR record, allowing me to see that most recent engagement. And as I slide down, getting more detailed information based on those sharing agreements, so I can see the overlapping engagements within HMIS and EHR data. As mentioned as before, those data points and data sets are all aligned with that agnostic vision, allowing the combination of all applicable data and making sure the right stakeholders have that visibility within Client 360. In addition to our Client 360, Client Insight is really focused on powerful and accessible dashboards and reporting that are really intended to make that data accessible in a user-friendly way. As I navigate to Client Insights dashboard, provides that ability to visualize and see a broad range of data at a glance. You'll notice my dashboard is presenting some key information about our coordinated entry and enrollments and age ranges of clients. And as I scroll down, a myriad of different visual representations of data that help me understand the populations at an aggregate level. And this type of information is so meaningful in that visual tool. Within Insight, making sure it's easy to use is a key driver that ensures I can reformat and identify what visuals are most important to me, allowing me to set up my format and select and move around my visuals so I can quickly identify and see that most critical data in a meaningful way in the system. Also allowing me to filter based on the source system that I have the permissions to access and the filters that are appropriate based on that data I'm looking at. Each of my components within my dashboard allow me to drill down into more meaningful data. So if I'm looking at, I have all these households with children and I want to compare and drive from the macro to the micro, I can click directly on that households with children, and each of my other components are drilling into that data set, allowing me to really dive into my data in a meaningful way directly on the fly.
Can I share one of my favorite aspects of the dashboard, Stacy? I can't hold back.
Yeah, please.
I, from an administrator standpoint, the complexity, and I think this is a growing complexity of the different roles that allow a COC, that allow a community to execute on its strategy. So when we think of like a street outreach team is going to have very different data consumption needs, different information needs. So the ability to configure and make this user configurable, everyone within the community can have their own dashboard, their own vision, and reflect the data that is most meaningful to them.
Thank you, David. As I jump into reports, several of the features on the dashboard apply also to our reports. So we'll dive in a little bit more as we get into our reports. But being able to spotlight and drill in, export this data, show us tables, and get that meaningful data for each component applies both at the dashboard and other reports that are available within Client Insight. As I dive into existing reports, these reports allow me to create and work with my own reports, share across my community of stakeholders, and even publish them for external use, making sure these are meaningful and accessible directly to those stakeholders where it matters. Again, able to drill into the different reports by categories that are defined and aligned with your focus and needs, and allowing you to drill in and run additional meaningful reports from enrollment based to data quality driven reports. And as I jump in my current client analysis report, you'll see that similarity with the dashboard and a report containing applicable components tied back to that overarching goal and need for managing that client level data. Within my current client analysis, drilling into the right data with meaningful drill down reports, the same click through options so we can drill into those individuals with mental health problems and seeing the impacts across the other demographic categories that we're looking at. As I'm looking at our current living situation data, being able to export and pull that data out quickly and efficiently, looking at those summarized aggregate counts, as well as showing as a table to get the defined counts and numbers in alignment with my individual chart or graph using the best visualization based on the data we're looking at accomplishing. As noted, making sure the right stakeholders have access to this data is key. So the ability to send a report, emailing it to an individual, as well as printing or even editing or creating brand new reports using Power BI tools directly within the client insight environment. This can enable you to identify and add those key metrics and visualizations, as well as take and continue to expand and enable further tracking and components within the system, allowing you to utilize those key visualizations and data points to identify and incorporate meaningful data within those data sets that you have in your solution. As I drag and drop, we can see the ease of creating and incorporating additional data within the system. Those key usability points within Client Insight really drive home those key benefits for an accessible and visible way for stakeholders to engage and understand the data for further outcomes. David, anything you want to add on our accessibility
I
and visibility
I
topic?
do. And we've really talked about the tech stack taking the very latest in innovation and technology, what's possible in a data warehouse tool, and making it accessible. So that was a core focus of us in developing this tool. And as you saw, Stacy, and we're not even able to cover we're covering a fraction of the features today, and really want to continue that conversation. But what I appreciate about what having this ability to use those existing reports or tailor configure the reports that have been built and will be continue to be added, providing that value. But there's also that ability to build a report from the ground up, and you have access to the entirety of the data sources that are ingested into Client Insight. So the idea here is that you are not limited in the insights that you're able to build through that reporting feature in Client Insight. And of course, we talked about that the Client 360 capability. So in that regard, you're able to support this collaborative community-wide management and support. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move into the next component of our presentation. So with that, yes, let's get into our one of my favorite topics, which is our feature roadmap. It's like, where are we headed? What does this look like? How are we going to continue to innovate and provide value in Client Insight? And we're looking at some pretty exciting additions, one of which we should actually have available here very soon, which is this ability to apply predictive analytics and predictive risk modeling. How do we get to a state where we're able to act instead of react? I know I felt like I was perpetually in a situation where the data wasn't actionable. Data has a shelf life. If we're not able to use it to translate into the information we need to solve a problem, then it's not effective. And we've lost that capacity even in collecting it. So identifying and applying AI initiatives, particularly around the predictive analytics and predictive risk modeling, allows us to get ahead on issues such as being able to predict homelessness or identify housing needs in a community long before they actually present, and being able to consider how to monitor performance effectively. What is the funding blend that's necessary to support changing needs in the populations we serve? These are all capabilities that we're looking to make not just as features in Client Insight that we would make available, but providing the tools through Client Insight that allows communities to build their own models and then making that accessible. So again, as one of the themes, it's taking powerful tool sets and making them accessible without the need for steep learning curves or a lot of technical background. That capability extends as well into our exploration of another AI derivative technology, natural language processing. The ability for software to understand plain text, plain language in providing us what we ask. So I want you to think about that example Stacy just showed you of one of the many baseline reports we have there, and that ability to edit and configure that report. We would like it to get to a place where none of that is really necessary. You could simply text, this is what I want this report to be, type it out. And then using NLP, the software is able to render that report and then even explain what the report means. To us, this is how you address accessibility, making things even simpler and making insights more attainable. We're also, and this is, if you think back when we're talking about architecture and why does the architecture matter and why do we even have multiple tools? Well, it's because there are different purposes for transactional databases like Client Track and data warehouses like Client Insight. The two can work together and should. When working together, they're collectively able to provide caseworkers with more actionable information, insights to drive effective services to clients. So there's a real ability to collaboratively between different platforms really address the needs that communities are facing today, but position communities to grow along with the software and support future needs so that you're not worrying 3 to 5 years from now, do I have the right infrastructure, the right technology infrastructure to meet the changing needs of my communities? Part of how we're exploring that is through the development of a series of APIs. Essentially, how does Client Insight communicate with other transactional databases, which can include Client Track? And so one of the ways that we're expanding the capabilities of Client Insight is to make that data that's contained within Client Insight attainable within all the different databases that make up a community's care coordination network. So, for example, let's say you're a caseworker and you don't want to, big surprise, you don't want to enter the same data into 4 different platforms, but you are working with a client that is also being served by a different organization. Using Client Insight as a community information exchange or care hub, we can have information exported from Client Insight in real time into those different databases that allows for that shared collective community knowledge to inform care case coordination, regardless of where that client is accessing services. And in this regard, you really truly do have a no wrong door system. Clients are not being re-traumatized. They're not being asked to reshare information. It's adding capacity back to caseworkers, and it's addressing some of those challenges that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. Finally, how do we use data to inform service recommendations? It stands to reason we are awash in data. We talked about that. We knowing which data to use and how to derive conclusions, plans from that data can be daunting. And there's no reason why we can't use the ever increasing capabilities that are available to us, the technological innovations that continue to drive change in our industry, to inform that. Client Insight is capable of evaluating big data and looking for those patterns in a client's service history to potentially make recommendations that caseworkers can then choose to follow or not. To us, the vision is that technology should act as a force multiplier, supporting the caseworker in their day-to-day activities and never replacing them. This is where real innovation is possible and is an area that we're actively exploring as part of our future roadmap. I mentioned earlier that we didn't even cover the majority of the features that were in Client Insight today. Really hope that we can continue the conversation with you, but I do want to touch on a couple of those capabilities that we weren't able to demo today. One of which is the ability of Client Insight to address that ever-present data quality challenge. It's so fundamental. If you don't have data quality, you don't have anything. Although I think for many of us, it's the last thing you want to deal with. So we thought, why not automate that process? Client Insight can automate your data quality management processes by evaluating data at the point of ingestion and looking for patterns, even threshold detection. So as part of a feature set in Client Insight, you say, I don't want to see higher than 10%. Client doesn't know, client refused for this specific data element for this specific project type, and Client Insight will monitor that. And if it detects violations of those thresholds, we've established a process to automate communications to go to those program managers and stakeholders to let them know there is a potential data quality violation or challenge in the data that needs to be addressed, and then provide the information that enables those individuals to act on it, to address those data quality challenges. By automating this process and establishing the ability to alert community stakeholders, you're really able to support a collaborative system, one in which you can have faith in the data that you're relying on to make decisions. Additionally, we didn't get through even all the reporting and analytics capabilities. So in addition to what Stacy was kind enough to demo for us today, there is this idea that Client Insight should serve as a learning community. And in that regard, we have the ability for different individuals within the community to create reporting templates that can be used by other members of the community and even other Client Insight users outside of that community. So that saves time and capacity, and it really allows the collaboration and innovation that in my years I've come to identify as being a big part of effective social work. So you have that ability. You also have the ability, because who needs this data? And for those of us who've been HMIS administrators and have fielded a lot of calls from the media or maybe local government, tell me more about what homelessness looks like. That could take up a lot of time. So we need to bring those stakeholders into the conversation, and we do that by enabling the ability to share dashboards publicly and in a way that protects the information. Client Insight allows you to create public dashboards that are embeddable into any website or any place, any digital public space that you want to share data and make that available to your stakeholders. Really trying to drive the ideation and the momentum within that continuum of care, within these communities of care, to achieving community goals.
I
So
want to
there's,
pause you
oh
there for
yes,
just a minute, David, because I know we're not to Q&A yet, but we
not
have a great
quite.
question that
Oh,
ties directly to that comment that I'd love to address right now, if you're
let's
okay
do
with
it.
it.
I
Um,
am good with it.
Asking for more information about those public dashboards. They want to know how public, can you have separate dashboards for the press, for your board, for other state offices, etc. Can you speak to that as a great
I
example of what that
can,
looks like?
yes. So just as there are going to be an almost limitless need when we talk about the public to access data, you can have limitless number of dashboards to address that. So you could establish a different dashboard that addresses the common needs of the media, and I can think of a few of those. That tends to revolve around the point in time count, for example. So maybe some elevated dashboards that address that, and maybe a few other data points. So you're able to tailor dashboards to very specific public needs. And that could be the media, that could be local government. And in fact, it frequently will be. I mean, when we look at who defines a continuum of care, and that is ever growing in complexity, and then the stakeholders that make up a continuum of care, you're going to have different dashboards that will meet the data consumption needs that they have. So yes, you are able to define separate dashboards for separate purposes and make those accessible in the ways that are going to be most beneficial to those parties. That could be, one common example may be just to make those available on your COC webpage, for example, if you have one. Here's a series of public dashboards, consumable by different groups. You could also make those dashboards available as a kind of embeddable widget directly to those organizations, so they're able to display them on their websites or in their digital content. So you have a variety of different ways to meet that need. All right, that was a great question. I appreciated that. Thank you. So, no, I'm almost done. I swear, I swear. So just the last two pieces that we got to touch on real quick. The ability to additional configuration for the UI. We didn't really get a chance to get into what does that flexible security model look like? How do we adapt that? What do the roles look like? So this is another topic that we'd love to continue the conversation with. And finally, just the ability to configure and adapt Client Insight based on your unique community needs, which again is another one of those UI configuration capabilities that we would love to discuss further. And with that, let's get to the Q&A. All right. What other questions do we have out there?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you, Stacy and David. Yeah, we're looking at a couple of so one of the questions I believe you already addressed, but I just wanted to reiterate. So one person asked, can data be made anonymous for public reporting? And I believe you said that the answer is yes, right?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that was one of the first working, we always want to work from a security first mindset. Like, so we want to certainly make data accessible, but we have to protect it. And that's that maddening, paradigm that we always have to consider. And so we are able to completely separate and keep private any of that identifiable information, anything that would constitute PII, or even in cases where the definition of PII maybe expands to other data elements that might readily identify an individual, and protect that and keep that separate from both those public dashboards that we've been talking about, but also as needed between organizations that are directly participating in client insight.
And I
Gotcha.
think
Thank
that
you.
tied back to another specific question about who else would have access to my data if it's ingested within that system. Then that kind of ties back to that question as well. And those sharing agreements can be replicated and set up within those agreements so that those identifying data points and based on those use cases for your community, your aggregate reports can be specific to your data set, or you may provide a high level view that's published and accessible across the community. So it gives you that flexibility to ensure you're accessing your data, but people who maybe shouldn't see certain sets aren't able to see that information. David, anything you want to add there?
No, I'm thinking about, the challenges of effective collaboration in such a complex legal and regulatory environment. And, that was really happy in how we were able to approach that, because what's funny about the sharing of data is that what you agree upon today as far as what can be shared and how it can be accessed can very easily change. It's not, and will, and grow in complexity and different partners. And so the structure that we've established is very malleable in that regard. So you're able to dynamically manage access, and as relationships change, so does access, and you're able to accommodate that.
Thank you, David. Uh, there was one other question. Um, with data warehousing, what other community data sources would you recommend we start with trying to add data to ours in the warehouse?
Ooh, I love this question. Let's talk about that. So some that immediately come to mind and that I've worked on as far as establishing like data warehousing, and you really got to think of the common problems. What are you trying to solve? Who's a principal stakeholder in solving that problem? And what data are they able to bring to the table? So when I think of what many communities are struggling with right now, I immediately start thinking of housing authorities, public housing data sources, anything that's a key community resource. So housing is a critical community resource, and it's also very complex what goes into planning for housing, managing housing. And you think of, if you bring in housing authority data, what does that do for coordinated entry? The ability to maybe even support community by name lists using client insight and all these different data sources. So housing authorities are top of mind. We also, I'm thinking of uh, COVID and what COVID did to us as far as being able
Yes.
to manage social service delivery, and so that's where I think of health districts and the information that they have, epidemiology. What does this mean from a community perspective, and using big data to plan as we evaluate the impact of that data on models and our ability to prioritize how we provide care. Yet another is local government. I mean, and the different data sources they have that can contribute to our shared understanding, in the end, of our social safety net, the different providers that make that up, and how we're collectively serving vulnerable populations. So those are just a handful of the data sources that I would recommend looking into. And the key is to find anchors, community anchors that will allow you to bring on others as you bring on data sources and you generate value in this data set. It will attract others that see that value and want to participate. That's how you get a collaborative effort going. That's how you drive better outcomes.
I love that. And definitely with that focus of solving homelessness for those in the homeless space, of other data sets that help us move forward in the prevention market. Is
Mhm.
there past due utility data that we can incorporate? Is there, what other eviction level data or housing related data in to help move our efforts forward is always a good priority as well.
Amen.
Thank you.
Hit us with another one, Brace. What
Yeah,
do you got?
here's a great one. Can you talk a bit more about the process for bringing in data from other transactional databases
Mm,
or integrating with other systems?
sure. Yeah. Do you want to take that one, Stacy?
If I can find my mute button, I sure can. Absolutely. Yeah. Bringing in data from other systems and integrating with other systems is a key usability tool. So, one piece as you're ingesting that data, of course, using secure methods to load that data into the system, which may be inclusive of uploading files from manual sets that you receive, or could be automated based on your vendor systems and transactional data. Work with us and your vendor and identify those components to submit those electronically is a great way to do that, with always the ability to select and upload files directly within the system by those users who need to get that data in, as well as that reverse method, as David talked about earlier in the presentation, talking about those APIs in particular to integrate that data to those transactional databases that may need data back for individual users to
Mhm.
access in that way.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think, just to give you a sense of scale, I mean, Ecovia is currently supporting the city of New York in this regard through Client Insight with, 70 plus different organizations needing to ingest that data into a single environment. So, the ability to provide for that manual, uploading your data, but also automating that and then just determining the frequency that best meets your needs as a community. These are all questions that should be asked in evaluating data warehousing, but they're all considerations that went into the structure that we built with Client Insight.
Wonderful. Anything to add to that, Stacy?
No, I think he hit it on the head.
You hit it on.
Perfect.
Great. And then we have one more question. How do we learn more about the administration of the data warehouse? The capacity required to administer, access permissions, etc.
Mm. Well, that is a fantastic question. So we will be sending out additional materials. Like I said, this is a start of a conversation, and really, what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to have many more interactions like this as we talk. Not just about client insight, but what about technology, making technology meaningful in addressing our social needs and particularly providing better outcomes. Again, when we get to the analytics that drive outcomes, really what does that look like? What are the practices that allow that? So this is a conversation, and as part of that conversation, we'll be sending out some information, some additional collateral related to what client insight is, how it does what it does. But we're also happy to schedule follow-ups and really talk through that. And what does administration look like? What do you need to consider as far as maybe what problems you want to prioritize in your community? What are the governance practices that go into successfully maintaining and using a data warehouse? These are all areas that we can explore in future webinars or one-on-one interactions with you. And I really hope that you'll reach out and talk a little shop with us.
Yeah, that's a great segue, David. Thank you. So I believe we got to everyone's questions. So what comes next is up to you. As David mentioned, we're going to follow up with an email with some more information. But If you want a more in-depth explanation or a personal demo of Client Insight, we encourage you to reach out to us at the email address right there below, sales@ecovia.com. Or if you're currently using Ecovia products, a current client, we ask that you contact your client success manager, and then we can schedule a time to have a more detailed discussion and demo some more of those capabilities.
Wonderful. Looking forward to those conversations. All right. Do we
That's,
have any other questions pending, Bryce?
I believe we've got to everyone,
All
so it looks like
right.
that's it.
Okay.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. A big thank you to Stacy and David. Um, so as soon as it's done processing, we'll make the recording available to everyone so you can review this at your leisure. And again, if you have any further questions, concerns, or comments, again, please feel free to reach out to us at sales@ecovia.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So thank you for joining this presentation, this webinar, and everyone have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a
all.
great weekend. Bye.